Fucking g'day mate! Today I'm going to be teaching you Photoshop to a level that will be useful to your band. There should be at least one person in your band who knows how to use Photoshop, and I'll give you some examples as to why. First of all, paying a graphic designer to do all of your marketing assets is just going to be fucking expensive. Sometimes upwards of $300 just for a Facebook cover photo, a profile picture, and some social media assets. Secondly, if you can utilize some basic Photoshop techniques that don't look like complete horseshit, you're going to separate yourself from the pack instantly. Because you'll be able to churn out content that'll promote your shows, your new music, and miscellaneous competitions, and it won't cost you a cent. Let's say you get offered a club show, which is something that's quite popular here in Australia. Basically what happens is they'll pay you a small guarantee and pay you $2 for every person that says your name at the door. For smaller bands, it's a pretty big opportunity. I know it was for our band when we first opened for like a big headline act. No matter what, you're playing to a lot of new faces. But in short, the way these gigs worked is that the people that would say your name at the door, if there's a long list of people that said your name, you get invited back to play more shows, and if no one said your name, that was more or less your last club gig. What I imagine the promoters would do is that they would have like an Excel spreadsheet, and they basically sort by opening bands that brought the most amount of people to the door, and they would cycle those bands on shows until they stopped bringing people. So you basically want to do everything you possibly could to get people to come to the show, but the promotional assets that they gave you to promote that show were usually pretty garbage. From the poster that you got, you weren't sure whether it was a band that was headlining or whether it was a drink special. And your name's just this tiny little font amidst a slew of other information. It's fine to share that poster initially, but after that, you basically don't want to be plugging the same show poster every 2 weeks until you play the show. Firstly, because there's just so much text in those posters that Facebook will actually just nerf the post and will show it to less of your fans. And secondly, it gets a bit whatever if you're a fan and you see a band just constantly posting the same poster. So what you might want to do, what I see a lot of bands doing, is post a live photo with some text. But fuck that, that's a bit boring. You can spice up your promotion by taking that live photo and basically trying to match some of the aesthetics in the image itself to the poster you were given by the club. So things like adding like no more than 20% text to the image itself with like a clear objective for your fans, something like say our name at the door for cheaper entry. You can easily make it look like the club has made these assets for you, and if you make them well enough, the club really isn't going to care. Basically, it's free marketing for them, and the better job you do at promoting the show, the more likely it is you're going to be invited back to play more. The second example, and probably the most important example of why you should know how to use Photoshop just to a basic extent, is for promoting one of your releases. What I do is I will pay a graphic designer or a cover artist to make the cover art, and if they've made the CD or vinyl inlay, that's even better. And I work out how to manipulate the aesthetic of that cover photo to use for things like Facebook and Twitter cover photos, YouTube assets, things to post on your news feeds. And it's really as simple as asking the artist. They can send you a PSD file, which is like a Photoshop file of the artwork, which will usually include the text, the font they use, and some high resolution images of the artwork. If they are kind enough to send you basically a laid version of that, you can really break it down and take certain elements from that artwork, and then you can apply it to your social media posts. Having basic Photoshop knowledge will mean you can actually create these assets for free. They're not crucial enough that you want to pay through the teeth for someone else to do them for you, and they're kind of like not worthless enough for you to not do them at all. You want to know how to use Photoshop to a very basic level so you can use what you know to promote your release on your social media and in your news feeds. Today I'm just going to be showing you a basic cover photo for Facebook that matches the aesthetic of your cover art. Now that's going to be a bit dry and I don't care, but someone in your band needs to know how to use Photoshop, and if you're watching this video, that most likely means you. Haha. To begin following along with me, you're going to need to have Photoshop and a PSD or layered PDF file of your cover art. You're going to need your band's logo and some promo pictures of your band. The wider the better, because we are going to be making a cover photo today. So I've got a little template here which you guys can use. I'll put a link in the description. Basically, I just kind of got this picture off Google and I use it for all my templates. I'll explain a little bit about it first so you kind of know what we're looking at here. So it already kind of says it right here. Basically, this blue section in the middle is what you're going to be seeing on a desktop, and the green on top is what's visible on a mobile when you look at a Facebook cover photo. Basically, the main rule of thumb is you want to make sure that, say if you're using a promo picture of your band, that you haven't got everyone's head sitting up in this region up here, or too much important information sitting in the bottom, and you want to keep all of your important text inside this blue bar here. So no matter what, whether you're on a desktop or whether you're on a mobile phone, it's going to look fine. So what you want to do now is go to your folder where you've got your band promo, your pretty band. That's not us, we're not a pretty band, but maybe your band's prettier than us. And just drag it into Photoshop like this. It's going to kind of sit here until you hit the enter button, or return I guess. On Mac I still call it enter, I don't know who calls it return, except for weirdos. And basically what you want to do now is you want to go across to your layers here. So every time you drag something into Photoshop, it's going to create a new layer. Don't really worry about that background layer at the moment, it's not really important. But what you want to do to make sure you're kind of making sure that everything's lining up nicely is you want to click on your template layer along the right here, hold down click and drag it up so it goes over the top of your promo. And oh shit, it's gone. What do we do now? Basically go across to the opacity over here and crank it down to a level that you're comfortable with, because what we're going to do now is we're going to move the image behind it so it kind of nicely lines up within the blue rectangle in the middle there, so we make sure it looks good on a phone and on a computer. How you're going to do that is you're going to go across to your layers again, click on your promo, and then what you're going to do is you're going to go Control T for Windows or Command T for Mac, and now you're going to actually be able to move it and kind of change the size of it. Now this is really funny when people don't know how to use this technique. It just really makes me laugh. People try and like rearrange the photo, but what they're doing is they're kind of like stretching it, because it's not expanding or shrinking in a way that constrains its properties. It's kind of just like, oh, there we go. Hey, I look a little bit thinner there. It's not so bad. Maybe I should do that. But what you want to do is, when you're going to move it, you go Command T, grab the corner at the top, and we're going to hold the Shift key so it constrains its properties, and we're just going to drag it out until it fills up each side of the cover photo template. Now as you can see here, obviously it's kind of cutting off all over our heads. I think stylistically that'd look really good, so what you want to do is you want to move it down until you've got it into a spot where you can kind of like, where it kind of looks nice and centered. But basically when you're moving the picture as well, what you can do is, to make sure it doesn't kind of go all around the shot, is again, you can actually hold the Shift key when you move up and down, and then it'll lock it into place pretty well. You pretty much can't go left and right without really giving it a good shake. It just kind of constrains it there nicely to the middle, or on the axis, so you're going up or you're going down. So we're just going to put it about here. So I can see here that in this blue rectangle, which is quite opaque at the moment, that everyone's kind of fitting in quite nicely, and there's a lot of negative space here for all of our text. So what you want to do now is you want to hit enter to kind of like lock it into place until you see those little grid lines go away. That's how you know it's no longer being moved around. And then what you want to do is go across to your template, and we can more or less just turn that right down to, we can turn it down to nothing at the moment, so you see what it looks like. Now what we're going to do is add the text to it that matches your band's cover art. So for us, I'll give you a quick little example. Let's just say this was for promoting a tour. I've got an image here which was made by our artist, Soft Surrogate, Kevin Moore. He's a fucking wizard. So he made us this tour poster for us. So go to your cover photo or to your tour poster, or whatever your artist that's designed has given you, and just double click the PSD, and it should automatically open into Photoshop. So once you've opened your cover photo or tour poster or whatever it may be that was designed by, you know, an actual qualified artist, someone with a lot more experience than you or I, it's probably going to freak you the fuck out just how many layers are sitting across here on the right. It can be quite hard to navigate when you're looking at layers from work that somebody else has done. It can oftentimes be very overwhelming. But basically what we're going to do today is we're going to try and grab some of the text files, and we can more or less just drag them into our cover template. To identify what's what, it's just a bit of trial and error. Like, you basically go along to the layers here, and you can start basically hitting the eye icon, which makes things visible or it makes them disappear. So let's say we go to the header, which is a folder full of, it looks like text. Hit that eye icon. Hey, shit, who's playing? Oh, it's a mystery. You can see there like what elements are located within that folder, and turning the eye icon on and off will kind of like give you a bit of an idea of as to what you're looking at. You can do the same with like your shadows, and if you can see that there, some stylistic choices, things that go over the top of it. We're not going to be worrying about really any of that stuff today, because our cover photo is going to be quite simple. It's just a promo picture with text files going over the top of it. So what you can do is, now that we've identified that the header here is all the text, and it's kind of got all the important information that we want. We've got the name of the headlining act, the tour name, special guests, and at the top here you've got who's presenting it. I'd recommend popping that sort of stuff in. It's kind of, besides being a bit big dick, it's also quite respectful, I think, to the people that are booking your tour to advertise who they are. And then what you want to do is you're going to grab the information and drag it. Hey, there it all is. So what we're looking at now is a really massive logo. All the text is all over the shop. It's kind of a bit fucking all over the place. Doesn't really look great. If we went back to our template, just make sure it goes to the top, and put the opacity back up, you'll see that just from dragging and dropping, it's not good enough because all of our text is kind of like below the safety margins. This text up here that's above the safety, it just kind of looks a bit like shit at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to tidy all of that up. So we're going to go across to our header, open the folder, and start identifying what's what. So basically we want to try and work on the elements at the bottom half. This stuff at the top isn't really important at the moment. That can just sit there for now as a placeholder. But we want to make sure that this stuff here, all the text here, looks nice and kind of succinctly sits within the photo nicely. So we're going to have to identify what they are. Go across here and just start ticking on things until you find out what's what. Okay. So what I've identified here is basically the top title here, the NWA and Grayscale Records present up top is this top layer. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to grab these files instead. Now hold shift, click the top one, hold shift, you've got them all. And then we're going to do Control T again, like so. And we're going to just make that a bit smaller. You're going to hold the shift key to make sure none of it goes out of whack. And just start pinching it down. Hit enter to lock it in place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the template and we're going to crank that opacity back up. Hey, there we go. And we're going to move the text until it's center, until it looks kind of nice within the image and fills up this negative space around here. Now what you want to do when you do that is go back to your faded language, hold shift until it goes down to all your text layers. And now you can actually just grab it and start moving it. Now I'm sure there's a way of doing this that's a bit more technically proficient, but this is like my Neanderthal way of working it out. You just basically click on it, drag it until you see those pink lines. There you go. Until you see that big long pink line go from the very top to the very bottom, it means that the text file or whatever it is that you're holding is centered perfectly. Sometimes it'll line up to other things, so you can see here the corner of the D is now in line with the very end of the word present at the top there. That can be a really good way to make sure your text is kind of like lining up the way you like it, but for the purpose of this, keeping it simple, we're just going to go right to the middle until we see that thick line. Drop it, click it again, hold shift, and move it down. Now what we're going to do is just to check to see what it looks like, grab your template, crank down the opacity to 0, bam. Now what you can see here is there's kind of some extra files that we really don't really need for this cover photo. You can see this like some kind of alien language that's kind of lightly opaque there. While that looks really cool on the tour poster with all that negative space up there, kind of looks like horseshit here. So what we're going to do is we're going to find out what that layer is and we're going to just delete it. Now you can go over here and you can start clicking through until you find out which one it is, or you can actually go over, hover over the opaque text, right click, and you're going to see all the layers that the click was hovering over at the time. Now it's a bit confusing because you think to yourself, well, I clicked right on the opaque layer, why is it saying the template is the top one? That has to do with what you've got going on over here. It's always going to go to whatever your top layer is, whether it's opaque or not. Because right now it's thinking, this is at the top, that's what you click first. Even though the opacity is on 0 and you can't see it, it thinks the first thing you clicked was the template. Then you go down to header, which is your folder over here, and it's saying what you thought you clicked on within that header folder, and that was actually the faded language. So you can click that, and it'll actually select the faded language over here. So what you can do from there is just delete it. Hey, it looks nicer already. What we might also do is there is some little alien language down here. I don't know if you can see it or not. We right click again to find out what it says. Bottom language. I don't really need that. It doesn't look great. I'm going to delete that as well. Then when I crack on the opacity for the template just to check again where it's sitting, there's a bit of like extra negative space down here that kind of looks a bit shit. So what we might do is we might go back across, select everything again, Control T, hold down Shift, and drag it down. Now, I don't know if this is like taught in design class or whatever, but what I usually like to do to make sure everything kind of looks uniform is match the spacing where I can to the asset that I'm making. So you can see here there's an even amount of spacing between the logo of Gravemind to Conduit as there is from Conduit to Special Guest, which line up just here. What usually looks nice is if you can kind of match the negative space along here to be similar to these ones. Now you don't have to be dead accurate, but if you go Control T, you can actually use your mouse arrow keys to really finely adjust how far up and how far down. You can lose a lot of time doing this, and you can get a bit anal about it, but just basically move it until you're happy with it. I think that looks pretty good there. Now I'm going to zoom out, and what you'll find is sometimes is some information doesn't actually have to be visible at all times. So if we turn this opacity down, this is what you're going to see when you look at a mobile phone. Now unfortunately there's heaps of negative space down here with nothing really going on. Tough titties, like that's just kind of how Facebook fucks you a little bit. It's not going to look great or perfect on everything, but let's just say we crank the opacity of the template back up just to see what it's going to look like on a computer screen. It's going to look great on a computer screen. You've got the exact same kind of spacing from here to here. The logo is kind of nicely set at the bottom. Aiden's head's not too far cut off, but it all kind of lines up really nicely. You're going to have to bite the bullet. One thing's going to look great, one thing's going to look okay. In this instance, I don't think it looks too terrible. I don't think that looks terrible for a mobile screen. It does the job. Now, the other thing you want to consider as well is what information is completely relevant. What do you need to have there? We could spend a lot of time trying to make sure that this New Order artist in Grayscale Records fits somewhere tightly within this, but if let's just say I chucked it here, gave it a bit of spacing, turn off my template, back to 0, it kind of looks like hot shit. Kind of looks like, whatever. Because that's how it's going to look on a mobile screen. On a desktop it'll look alright, but on a mobile screen it really does look like horseshit. So I would say that information isn't all that important, so we can actually make it look a lot nicer by just moving it right back to the top and sticking it there. Cool, so looking at this now, it looks pretty good, it looks fine. It's doing the job. You've got everything nicely lined up, you've got good spacing between all the words. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to make sure that the text and everything kind of looks like it's actually meant to be where it is. And the simplest way you can do this is by creating what they call drop shadows. Now, drop shadows is like the silver bullet to fixing any fucking image in the world ever. It can get you at a spot of bother if someone says to you, no, I want this text to be this color. It's like, I want the text to be orange, but you're like, but if it's fucking orange or blue, it's going to disappear into the background. Well, with drop shadows, it doesn't matter. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to fix how this New World Artist in Grayscale Records Presents looks and make sure it kind of is a bit easy to read and sits itself nicely where it is. But as you can see here, this text file does look a lot different to the text file that was given to us by Kevin. You can see at the top here, the New World Artists and the Grayscale Records, they're sitting really nicely, like they're a solid color. But then when we go across to here, you can see that some of the words are kind of blending with the color in the background. This will happen when people who know how to use Photoshop will create assets. They'll kind of use different like layering modes, I guess. But it can really fuck us up when we don't know what we're doing. So to work out what's going on when this happens, you go across to your layer, click on your NWA and your Grayscale Records layer, and then up here it's going to show you what is happening to it at the moment. At the moment it's set to exclusion. Now this is really cool. You can actually set, like, you can play around with this, and I encourage you to do so when you're trying to layer text files and layer images above other images, because depending on what you choose will change the way it looks. So it's set to exclusion. If we set it to say something like overlay, it's going to make the image kind of see-through. If we go say darken, it's going to make it darker. What we want to do is we actually just want to go normal, just so it looks how it does more or less on the post image. But as you can see, now that we've clicked normal, the end and the present, they're really missing. They're really not looking good up against this shiny blue background. What we're going to do is we're going to create a drop shadow. Now, drop shadows are my best mate. We've been friends for years. I'm going to show you how we use drop shadow to make this text actually look half decent. So go across to your NWA or Grayscale or whatever text file you've got that's not looking nice against whatever background you've got. Right click, go blending options, and it's going to bring up all these different blending options here. Now some of these are really cool. I'll move this across so you can see what I'm doing. You click drop shadow, and basically what it's going to do is it's going to set the parameters of drop shadow to whatever the last thing you did was. Now I don't know why I was making some kind of lighten, I was doing a light outlay. That's not going to work for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this blend mode here to normal, and we're going to grab the color wheel, and depending on your image, let's just say if your background's really light, then you're going to make the drop shadow dark. If your image is really dark, then maybe you would benefit from changing the drop shadow to something light, or maybe even changing the color of your text. I'll leave that up to you. Choose your own adventure on that one. So we're going to make it dark, we're going to make it black. Any color you pick on this wheel, bottom right, bottom right or top left, it's all going to be either white or black. Hit OK. So as you can see, the outline's changed. It pops a lot more. It does sit a lot nicer within this image, but stylistically, it kind of looks a bit off. Just because it's such a thick outline, it's drawing too much attention to the drop shadow. A lot of good designers, they won't really draw too much attention to the elements that kind of separate text files. You kind of want to make it look, you don't want it to be noticeable, basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the parameters of this drop shadow to make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more natural, and a little bit less obvious. So if we go across here, you can see there's a distance, spread, and size, and there's an angle. Now, if I crank the distance, basically it's going to create like a fake. It's like a fake lighting effect. It's saying that the light is coming from 117-degree angle from here, and it's casting a shadow. And if you crank that distance, it's going to crank the casting of the shadow. But this really kind of looks shit in most instances. I usually leave it at 0 and maybe adjust a little bit. So I always suggest try and put it right about bang in the middle. That'll do. So what we can see here is on the spread, it's kind of cranked to 92%, and the size of the actual shadow is about 13 pixels. It's really low. That's what you do if you want to create a real thick border, is you have the spread massive and you have the size of it kind of low. But if you want to make it more look like a shadow and kind of sit a bit nicer, you're going to want to put the spread right down real low and crank the size a little bit. And they're really finicky little options. You really have to play around with them to find out what kind of looks best for you. It's really up to you what you think looks good. It's already looking a lot better as it sits. You can read the end, you can read the presents, it's sitting there really nicely, but I still think the size of the shadow either end is a bit too, I don't know, obtuse maybe? Does that make me sound smart? I don't know. So what we'll do is we'll crank down the spread. Maybe we'll make the size. We'll check what it sees when we'll check what it looks like when it's bigger. It looks like horse shit, so we'll make it smaller. And then what we might do is, I don't mind the shadowing underneath. Up the top it looks a little bit weird. You can actually go to your distance and you can kind of just crank it down just a little bit. And you can see there it sits really nicely. You can read the words really well, and the shadow isn't drawing too much attention to itself. You can kind of really play with this. You can play with the opacity up here. So sometimes if you really love kind of like the shadow you've made, like maybe you like how it sits like that, but it's just a bit too dark, you can actually just crank down the opacity until it sits nicer. I still think that kind of looks like shit, so I'm going to turn that back down again. Yeah. You're going to hit OK. And as you can see there, it really does sit quite nicely. Like you can see everything there. It looks really presentable. You can do the same then for your logo that does fit well. So let's just say you dragged in all your text files and your logo, and it does sit nicely. You can see here, everything's quite readable. But you can actually make it look a little bit better. I think if you grab your images here, you grab your layer files, and you can go through individually by going blending options, adding drop shadow to each individual one, changing the parameters of it. As you can see there, it's kind of getting darker around that, and then trying to match them, but that's a bit time consuming. I'll show you a quick shortcut. What you can actually do is you go to your layers, you shift click all the ones that you want, and then chuck those little bastards in a folder. So down here is the folder button. It's made another group. You can rename that so you don't get lost. I would recommend you rename it because these files can get out of hand. Just call them logos. And then you can actually change the parameters for everything that's inside there by just right clicking on the folder, going blending options, going to your drop shadow, and you can start to play around with it a bit. Now, I remember doing this last time. I think it looked good when we made the spread quite large, made the size pretty big. You can see it's quite massive there. It's looking a bit ridiculous. You crank the distance a little bit, change the spread parameters until you're happy with it, until like it looks like it's meant to be where it is. So you can see from adding the drop shadow here, it's kind of taking the focus away from Aiden's arm, just about there. Putting that little drop shadow there does make the text pop a little bit more. If we turn it off, you can see it kind of doesn't blend as nicely with the background, but if we chuck it back on again, it does sit a lot nicer. And it's really up to you. You can just crank the opacity to change how visible it is, and just go to your heart's content. But once you've got it to where you like it, hit OK, and then check it again with the template layer across here on the right. Grab your opacity, start chucking it up, and you can see where it's going to sit. It's going to sit like this on a desktop, and it's going to sit the full image on a mobile. Now we're basically ready to export it. If you're happy with it, if you're happy with how yours sits, you can just go right back down to 0, and we're going to export it. So what I usually do is I go File, Export, Save for Web Legacy, and your first instinct is going to be to make the quality of this image like maximum. If you're doing this for Facebook, if you're doing this for Twitter, doing it at maximum, it's going to be compressed even more by the social media platform, and it's going to look like a hot potato. I think it always looks best when you set it to medium. This makes the file sizes around like say 400, maybe 600 kilobytes per picture, which does actually compress a lot less when you upload it to something like Facebook. Then click Save and you're done. So when you first look at Photoshop, it can be really complicated. Like you can see, there's a lot of different things you can click on and change, and it definitely gets quite overwhelming at times. But when you work out that there's not really a great deal that you really need from the software to make what most bands use, even most content creators that are really good at Photoshop, like they don't use half the shit that's in this software. So going through and finding out, getting used to the layers, getting used to blending options, and getting used to dragging and dropping text and resizing by holding the Shift key, you're kind of really going to get all the tools you need to start creating assets and creating things that are going to make your socials look a lot better.